A vast sea of golden grass stretches toward distant mountains. The wind bends the prairie in slow waves. A rider appears on the horizon, silhouetted against the orange glow of sunset. A lone horse, a single revolver, endless wilderness. This is the image most people imagine when they hear the words, the Wild West. Movies taught us that it was a land of fearless gunslingers, dusty saloons, and daily shootouts. A place where sheriffs battled outlaws in the middle of Main Street, where every cowboy carried a six-shooter and every stranger was dangerous. But what if almost everything you've seen is wrong? What if the real American frontier was far more complex, diverse, and surprising than Hollywood ever showed? Tonight, through AI historical reconstruction, we're traveling back to the late 19th century to witness the Wild West as it truly appeared. Not the myth, the reality. Welcome to the frontier. The year is 1880. You step off a train somewhere in the Western Territories. The first thing you notice is not violence. It's noise. Steam hisses from the locomotive. Workers unload crates. Merchants shout prices. Children run across muddy streets. Dogs bark. Wagons rattle over rough wooden planks. The frontier is busy, very busy. Contrary to popular belief, much of the West was not an empty wilderness. Millions of people already lived here. Many were Native Americans whose ancestors had occupied these lands for thousands of years. Others were settlers arriving from eastern states. There were immigrants from Germany, Ireland, Italy, China, Mexico, Scandinavia, and dozens of other regions. The Wild West was one of the most multicultural places in America. Walk down the street and you might hear English, Spanish, German, Chinese, or indigenous languages spoken within a few minutes. The West wasn't simply cowboys and Indians. It was a massive collision of cultures. A rapidly changing world where different peoples, traditions, and economies met each other. Sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently. And despite the popular image of isolated frontier settlements, many Western towns were surprisingly connected. Telegraph wires stretched across the landscape. Railroads linked distant communities. Newspapers arrived regularly. The frontier wasn't disconnected from civilization. It was becoming civilization. You walk into town. If you were expecting the dramatic movie sets you've seen on screen, you might be disappointed. Many Western towns looked messy, very messy. Roads were often dirt. When it rained, they transformed into thick rivers of mud. During dry months, clouds of dust filled the air. Wooden sidewalks lined some streets, but many people simply walked through mud, manure, and puddles. Horses were everywhere, and where there are horses, there is waste. The smell could be overwhelming. Most buildings were simple wooden structures. False front architecture was common. Builders created tall decorative facades to make businesses appear larger and more impressive than they really were. Behind these dramatic fronts, many buildings were surprisingly small. The famous saloon stood at the center of town life. But it wasn't just a bar. A saloon often functioned as a social hub. People gathered to discuss business, politics, cattle prices, weather forecasts, and local news. Many towns also featured churches, general stores, blacksmiths, shops, hotels, banks, schools, barber shops, photographic studios, dentists, doctors, and even opera houses. Some frontier towns hosted concerts, theater performances, lectures, and cultural events. The Wild West was rough, but it wasn't uncivilized. People worked hard to create communities that resembled the homes they had left behind. Now let's meet the most famous figure of the American West, the cowboy. Hollywood portrays cowboys as gunfighters, wandering the frontier in search of adventure. The reality was very different. Being a cowboy was a job, a difficult job, a dangerous job, and often a poorly paid one. Most cowboys earned modest wages. Their days began before sunrise. They spent long hours riding, repairing fences, branding cattle, fixing equipment, and managing herds. Many worked 6 or 7 days a week. The work was exhausting. Dust coated their clothes, rain soaked them. Summer heat baked them. Winter storms froze them. A cowboy's greatest enemy wasn't usually an outlaw. It was nature. Stampedes could kill. Lightning strikes were common. River crossings were deadly. Horse accidents caused countless injuries. Many cowboys never fired a gun in anger during their entire careers. In fact, roping skills were far more important than shooting skills. And contrary to popular belief, not all cowboys were white. Historians estimate that roughly 1/4 were African American. Many others were Mexican vaqueros whose ranching traditions heavily influenced cowboy culture. Native Americans also worked as cowboys. The cowboy was not a single stereotype. He represented a diverse workforce spread across millions of acres. A man steps into the street. The town falls silent. His hand hovers above his revolver. Across from him stands another armed man. This is the classic Western showdown, one of the most famous images in American culture. The problem, it almost never happened. Real gunfights were rare, extremely rare. Most Western towns actively discouraged weapons. Many communities required visitors to surrender firearms upon entering town. Even places now famous for violence often had strict gun regulations. The truth is that people in the frontier wanted safety. Merchants needed customers. Families wanted stability. Business owners wanted predictable environments. Constant violence was bad for business. When gunfights did occur, they were usually chaotic, not elegant duels. Participants often fired wildly. Visibility was poor. Adrenaline affected accuracy. Many shots missed completely. Historical records show that real gunfights frequently involved confusion, panic, and accidents. Nothing like the calm, cinematic standoffs of Hollywood. The famous figures we remember, lawmen, outlaws, and gunfighters, were exceptional precisely because they were unusual. Most Western residents spent their lives working, raising families, and avoiding trouble. A common misconception is that the Wild West belonged entirely to men. But women played essential roles throughout frontier society. You might encounter teachers establishing schools in newly formed towns, doctors treating isolated communities, business owners managing stores and boarding houses, journalists publishing local newspapers, ranchers operating family properties, homesteaders transforming open land into productive farms. Life for women could be extraordinarily difficult. Isolation was common. Medical care was limited. Household labor was intense. Simple tasks required enormous effort. Washing clothes could consume an entire day. Cooking often began before dawn. Water frequently had to be carried manually. Yet frontier life also created opportunities unavailable elsewhere. In some Western territories, women gained voting rights before women in many Eastern states. Economic necessity often allowed women to assume leadership roles that challenged traditional expectations. The frontier demanded adaptability. Everyone worked. Everyone contributed. Survival depended upon it. Near the railroad station, workers unload supplies. Many are Chinese immigrants. Their contribution to the West was enormous. Thousands helped construct the transcontinental railroad. Others established businesses, restaurants, laundries, farms, and mining operations. Walk through many Western towns during the late 19th century, and you would find vibrant Chinese communities. Yet these immigrants faced intense discrimination, violence, exclusion laws, economic restrictions, racial prejudice. Despite these obstacles, Chinese Americans became an integral part of frontier society. Their labor helped build the infrastructure that transformed the American West. Without them, the expansion of railroads and commerce would have been dramatically slower. The Wild West was not merely an Anglo-American story. It was an international story, a story of migration, opportunity, hardship, and resilience. Beyond the towns and ranches, another reality unfolds. For Native American nations, the late 19th century was a period of profound upheaval. The expansion of railroads, settlements, and military forts transformed landscapes that indigenous peoples had inhabited for generations. Buffalo populations collapsed. Traditional hunting grounds disappeared. Treaties were repeatedly violated. Communities faced displacement and forced relocation. Many tribes resisted. Others adapted. Some attempted diplomacy, some fought, some did both. The popular image of constant warfare between settlers and Native Americans oversimplifies a much more complicated reality. Relationships varied across regions and time periods. There were conflicts. There were alliances. There was trade. There were friendships. There were marriages. The West contained countless human experiences that cannot be reduced to simple narratives. For many indigenous communities, however, the closing decades of the 19th century marked the loss of sovereignty, territory, and traditional ways of life. Understanding the Wild West requires acknowledging this reality. Suddenly, gold is discovered, everything changes. Within weeks, tents appear. Within months, streets emerge. Within years, a town exists. Mining booms transformed the frontier at astonishing speed. People arrived from around the world chasing fortune: prospectors, merchants, investors, laborers, gamblers, dreamers. Most never became wealthy, but hope drove them forward. Boomtowns could grow almost overnight. They were crowded, noisy, and unpredictable. Property values skyrocketed. Businesses opened rapidly. Fortunes were won and lost. Yet many booms ended as quickly as they began. When resources declined, residents departed. Buildings were abandoned. Entire communities disappeared. Today, hundreds of ghost towns remain scattered across the American West. Silent reminders of ambitions that once seemed limitless. Walking through one feels like entering a time capsule. Empty streets, broken windows, weathered wood, the echoes of lives interrupted. When most people imagine the Wild West, they picture a world untouched by technology. But the frontier was actually a place of innovation. Railroads revolutionized transportation. Telegraphs transmitted information across continents within minutes. Barbed wire transformed ranching. Windmills provided access to groundwater. Photography preserved images of people and places. Industrial manufacturing supplied tools and equipment. The West was not isolated from modernity. In many ways, it was where modernity was advancing most rapidly. The railroad especially changed everything. Travel that once required months could now be completed in days. Goods moved faster. News traveled faster. Migration accelerated. Entire economies transformed. The railroad connected the frontier to global markets. Cattle raised in Texas could be sold in Chicago. Mining equipment manufactured in eastern factories could reach remote mountain camps. Distance mattered less than ever before. The Wild West was simultaneously rugged and modern. Imagine waking before sunrise. The air is cold. A wood stove crackles softly. Outside, horses shuffle in the darkness. You dress quickly, work awaits. For most frontier residents, life revolved around labor. Farming, ranching, mining, construction, transportation, commerce. Every day required effort. There were no supermarkets. No refrigeration, no automobiles, no internet, no electricity in most places. Simple tasks demanded planning and skill. Yet people still found moments of joy. Community dances, church gatherings, county fairs, baseball games, music performances, holiday celebrations. Photographs from the era reveal smiling faces. Families posing proudly, children playing, friends gathering together. The frontier was not merely hardship, it was also hope. People believed they were building a future. Many had left everything behind to pursue new opportunities. That optimism helped sustain them through difficult circumstances. As the 19th century approached its end, the frontier began to disappear. Railroads crossed the continent. Cities expanded. Telegraph networks multiplied. Population increased. Open land diminished. Government authority strengthened. The isolated frontier of popular imagination gradually faded. By the early 20th century, many Americans already viewed the Wild West as history. And something interesting happened. The myth began replacing the reality. Dime novels exaggerated adventures. Traveling shows dramatized frontier life. Movies later amplified these legends even further. The cowboy became a heroic symbol. Gunfighters became larger than life. Complex histories transformed into simple stories. The Wild West entered popular culture, not as it truly existed, but as people wished to remember it. The sun sets over the prairie. Railroad tracks stretch toward the horizon. A small town glows beneath the fading light. Smoke rises from chimneys. Children laugh somewhere in the distance. A train whistle echoes across the plains. The real Wild West was not a land of constant gunfights. It was not a stage populated entirely by outlaws and sheriffs. It was a place of workers, families, immigrants, entrepreneurs, native nations, ranchers, miners, teachers, merchants, and dreamers. A place shaped by opportunity and conflict, progress and loss, innovation and hardship. The frontier was messy, complicated, human. And perhaps that's what makes it so fascinating. Because when we strip away the myths, we discover something far more interesting than legend. We discover reality, and reality, as it often turns out, is the greatest story of all.